My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit Podcast.
If you'd like to help us make more content, consider joining the Patreon. You can also bookmark our affiliate links to Amazon and DriveThruRPG to support the show with each purchase. Want a free way to help the show? Give it a review on your favorite podcast platform, or like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Finally, if you'd like to be on the show, or think you know a great guest, contact me on the Discord server or on Twitter. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
All right, welcome. We are in the car, so forgive poor audio quality. And this is going to be world building. If people are interested in being a guest and helping, just come on and, spend a half an hour to an hour to just do something like this, or we just kind of take a topic and kind of run with it and see where it goes, I would be very interested in that with people. So hit me up on Twitter, on the Discord server, if you are interested in that, or leave your comments on what you think about this world building piece, and we'll go from there. All right, so the thing I want to talk about today is elves, and specifically a forest metropolis city that is built into, one single massive tree, right? It comes up in various literature and movies where, in the middle of the forest, there's this tree that's like 1,000 times larger than everything around it. And there's usually like a city or town or something kind of built into this, this place. And, all the elves live there or whatever, right? The wood elves, kind of what we're thinking of. I believe Avatar: The Last Airbender had something like this, if I remember correctly. The Avatar, the James Cameron movie has, the giant tree in the center of the forest that they all live in. And gosh, there are other places that have talked about it or mentioned something similar, right? So I wanted to kind of just take a look at that setup, right? You've got elves in the forest, or not even necessarily elves. You have some culture or race or, beings that specifically live in harmony with nature, and they live in this massive tree at the center of the forest, right? That's kind of the thing I'm looking at. Doesn't matter if they're elves or not or whatever. Maybe they're dwarves. Maybe they're tree dwarves. That'd be neat. But why, first off, the main question is why is this massive tree, like, how does that even exist, right? Like, are there more of those? Is it a special tree in and of itself? Is it like a magical tree? Is it a regular tree that's been enhanced by, nature magic that has allowed it to grow to this size? And one of the first thoughts that I had when I was kind of thinking about this idea the other day was typically elves, or, insert culture of people here, typically they're referred to as like innately magical in some way. They have some connection to magic, right? And I also was thinking, it kind of along with like gardening and stuff, you have this like composting, and different plants will utilize different resources in the soil. And when you, grind up organic matter and essentially create compost, the soil becomes very rich with nutrients, and that makes things grow way, way better than just, whatever their regular soil is like, right? So that kind of led me to the thought of, well, if you have a race of people who is specifically and kind of culturally geared towards being harmonious with nature, they're going to have kind of a regenerative approach and like life cycle, right? So they're not gonna waste things. They're not gonna waste materials, anything that they can't, use to like construct things is probably gonna get, composted or in some way kind of fed back into the system, this symbiotic, relationship with the trees and stuff that they live around. So if you have beings that are innately magical, then when they pass away and essentially like degrade, would that magic then, become infused in the soil? Would that like naturally, magically like enhance plants and stuff that were growing around that type of soil, right? So maybe you have this culture of elves. We'll just stick with elves because that's just kind of the easiest imagery for now. But if they maybe have around death, they have some sort of a ritual, and I don't know, like cremation or something would maybe make sense. And then you kind of condense back down into, a material that could then be like fed into the soil around the roots, be either like burial ceremonies or something is, spreading of the ashes, or they have specific, burial places by the roots of the plants, right? And maybe there's a different reason for why they started doing that. And then with this relationship, they're tending to this tree, this massive, massive tree, or it's a series of trees that all have this. But then you have this kind of magically infused soil along with all of the other, byproducts and stuff that, the culture isn't wasting. Thinking like if they go hunting, or like Native Americans, right? The Native Americans, when they would hunt like bison, they would kill a bison, and then they would take everything. They would take the furs to make clothes, and they would use the bones to make weapons and tools, and they would eat meat, and like nothing was ever wasted, right? And anything you can't use would be returned to the soil for farming and stuff. When they did crops, they would catch fish and they would bury the fish with the plants, and then the plants would grow better because there's a bunch of nutrients, sitting right by their root system. So they feed the plants their catch, and the plants grow bigger and feed them more, and there's this big regenerative cycle, right? Which is super cool and would make a lot of sense for a culture like, wood elves, who are symbiotic with nature and live in and among nature. And so that was kind of the initial pathway and thoughts here. Like, oh, why are these trees like this? Why would how would a society grow a series of trees, or a single tree to be this massive thing, right? And I think with consistent care and, innate magicalness of the beings living around it is going to help give it that food, essentially, to become this massive, massive tree that is, 1,000 times bigger than every other tree around it. I was also kind of thinking like just the imagery and thinking of like Lord of the Rings. I think it's the Hobbit series where they actually visit one of the wood elves, and you kind of see inside of, this very like wooded building, and everything is not building, but, they live in the trees, and everything is twisted wood, or twisted or carved, or it's like grown kind of, what is it, bonsai style, where it's directed growth to fit certain shapes or to make certain patterns. And that kind of like slow manipulation over time, over the course of like this plant growth, is going to give you these really neat places. And some stuff could be constructed. I could see like large kind of open spots or along the sides where you've got like series of platforms that are built out. And then you've got, you kind of more standard like building construction things potentially. But for elves, I think most of it would be probably kind of innately carved. And depending on how the street grows, you could have hollow insides where you have, things or sections inside of the tree. I mean, trees that get large enough sometimes hollow out on the inside, and you actually kind of have a center ring. That's probably more with like diseased trees and stuff. But I know sometimes when they fall over, they're already like the insides have kind of been carved out a little bit. So that's probably likely due to bugs, now that I think about it more. But in a certain way, elves living in a massive tree would kind of be like insects, although they may, as part of their symbiotic relationship, they may carve out certain sections inside to make, houses and areas, which would to some degree impact the tree, but unlike, emerald borers or whatever that go into a tree and basically eat the entire tree alive until it's dead, the elves would be kind of offsetting some of the damage that they're doing to, carving out the insides of a tree to make living spaces. They're still going to be caring for it and doing it in a way where they're overall are kind of like a net zero impact on the health of the tree, right? And they're going to be doing other things to try to benefit the tree more. So they're doing more good for the tree than harm to it, right? So coming back to that symbiotic nature. Another thing I thought would be neat there is, trees move a lot of water from their root system and then up into the leaves and stuff. And so it seems like it would be fairly trivial for elves to be able to tap into those kind of water veins or capillary. I don't know what the correct term is for trees. I'm a little rusty on my biology, but the idea with the water is that at any point inside of the tree, it should be fairly simple for the elves to tap into the veins essentially that carry water from the roots up and have a way to like almost have running water or at least access to water inside of the tree. So you could build these kind of elaborate city structures and still have not elaborate, but have access to water, which is going to be one of your main reasons, or not having access to water is a problem. So that's going to be important. Another thought with that is it would be interesting if they had like these big areas that were like bathhouses almost, where they had more of the water like collected. Almost makes me think of, sometimes when there's damaged stumps and stuff or trees, just like from my childhood growing up, if a limb falls off and there's like a hole there, then that a lot of times that would fill up with water. And the problem in Minnesota is that you get mosquitoes in those little pools of water. But if you had an elvish society, I could see something like that being turned into like a open air bathhouse or something, depending on the climate. Obviously, if it's snowing, maybe that's not going to work quite so well, but there's always opportunities for, them to use fire in certain ways to warm those as well. So that you've got the open air elven bathhouses in the trees. So that could be fun. What else? So as far as like things going wrong, if you wanted some sort of story hooks, I mean, some of the obvious ones are that the tree is in trouble, disease, insects, actual harmful insects of some kind, or drought, lack of water, lack of rainfall would be not good. That would be things that would need to be fixed. Insects would be a good like combat. You gotta get rid of gotta get rid of all the insects. You've got combat. Disease would be something a little bit more puzzle oriented, perhaps, to try and drought. Another one would be more of an environmental problem. You could also have invaders and fire. Maybe there's, the orcish warlords are chopping down the forest and setting it alight or something, right? So now you've got to go deal with another faction that's trying to invade. Another kind of classic D&D or fantasy trope, at least I feel like, is cultists. So you could always have there's some sort of a threat or a group of cultists, and they're trying to corrupt the tree, or they're trying to summon the tree as an eldritch, just like animate it essentially as like an eldritch god or something. Maybe they think that the tree is some ancient, powerful magic, and that's where they draw their magic from instead of vice versa. So the tree is granting them power instead of the elves granting kind of growth to the tree. And so they're trying to do something and, destabilize the current government inside this grand tree to take it over, or to perform some weird ritual or whatever. They think it's some sort of a cleansing rite, but it's actually killing the tree or something. Who knows? just get up to cultisty things. Or they're just straight up summoning like demons, or especially if they were like insect type demons, right? You could tie both of those together, right? She's like, oh, there's this invasion of like insectoid demons or something. And like, what's happening? Oh no, you look into it and oh, the cultists are opening portals to, let the demon insects in and eat through the trees, right? And now you're on like a kind of like going through the sewers, except it's like you're going through tunnels carved out by insects or by massive like demon insects, that sounds fun. Right now, okay, well, you got rid of the insects. Now we got to stop the cultists before they unleash bigger demons or more demons or whatever, right? Before they, they're eating a hole around this certain section and it's going to collapse or something. Who knows? Terrible cultist things, because cultists are terrible. What else? What other like adventure hooks, plot hooks could you get your players up to? If you have any, I would really enjoy some comments on this, either on the video on YouTube or on the Discord server. Let's get a little bit of discussion here. What other plot hooks could you have, around this tree, whether it's in peril or maybe it's not. Maybe there's just, political turmoil happening inside of, this great tree. Warring, invading factions is always easy, and also makes me think of the Lord of the Rings and kind of the Uruk-hai when they're cutting down all of the forests and the Ents, and then using those to fuel the fires of war and the forges and building, siege weapons and stuff, right? So I can entirely see an orc general that's like, chop down all the trees, and if you can't chop it down, burn them, just total war, total devastation. What is that? There's a term for that. Scorched earth tactics, right? I mean, orcs would be masters of scorched earth tactics, or you just leave nothing behind. Let's see, what other types of things could you get up to with a city that large? If you wanted to do, especially if you treat it as like a metropolis, right? Like, this is a massive city. People go their entire lives living inside of this city and never leaving and never really needing to leave, because there's just everything is there, right? Like, be like living in Los Angeles, right? Like, Los Angeles has a higher population than several states do, right? So, you could never leave Los Angeles and you would still experience, your full range of things, because there's just so much there, right? So if you had an entire elf campaign, everybody who decided they wanted to play elves, or like West Marches even, and you use this city as your main location, your main base, right? You could entirely have, or Blades in the Dark, right? So West Marches style is the tree and kind of the forest area is the last known or only known civilization. And it's dangerous to leave, but this is your safe place, right? That's West Marches. You'll go out and then you come back. Blades in the Dark, you could have various factions, right? We've got maybe cultists. We've got different political factions that are vying for power and control of various sectors of this metropolis city. You could run a game like that, and you could run everything entirely inside of the city. You would never have to leave if you didn't want to. A more traditional like D&D campaign this is probably just a location that the players, they may be here for a couple of sessions and they may leave. It may be a one-time deal. That would be more like the Avatar: The Last Airbender, when they're in like the swamp in the big tree area, and they go and they visit and they're there for like a few episodes and then they're gone and they leave and they go do other things, right? That's maybe more of a typical use case for this. And then, maybe they show up and there's a problem, like a typical D&D campaign. You show up, somebody's got a problem, the players decide to help. They spend a couple sessions doing some stuff. They fix it. They kill the cultists, eliminate the insects, whatever. They get, the blessing of the wood elves, and somebody gets a magical bow and arrow, the usual. So there's some ideas there for how you could work it into your campaign or into your game. We have some ways that it could be in peril or, problems, adventure hooks that could be going on. Just being a metropolis, you could get up to all of the other, general city problems. You've got things you could do in and around, I'm sure there would be hunting parties and people like foraging parties. I assume as elves would probably go out into the nearby forest to collect, various foods, hunting and stuff obviously probably happens outside of the tree, depending on what amount of wildlife sticks around the tree. But also I would assume that a decent amount of wildlife would take shelter by the tree. Then again, you've also got elves, which are predators nearby, so maybe less of that. So maybe the elves need to go out into the woods to find food. They have water from the tree, but food sources are important. Different sections of the trees would be interesting, right? We kind of talked about potentially a bathhouse type area. You're going to have living quarters, different, depending on the culture, potentially different levels of class. So you may have more of like a poor areas, and then like a middle class area, and then you like your government and elite type areas, and maybe the ranking or the kind of prosperity of the different places or the different locations is maybe depends on how high up in the tree you are, right? I mean, it would make sense if the higher you are in the tree, then that's like high class uptown. I mean, thinking of like business, like skyscrapers, right, are very large. Like office buildings, typically the higher you are in the building, at least I think, the higher you are in the building, the more expensive it is, right? Like those are the suites, right? The presidential suites at the top, at the 86th floor or whatever. I do know that actually used to be reversed. It used to be the poor or the cheaper rooms were at the top before elevators were invented, because you paid a lot to not have to walk up 86 flights of stairs. But then once elevators became commonplace, that switched a little bit, because now you've got the view and it only takes you, 5 minutes to get to the top, and you don't have to walk the whole way. So that's also another thing that you could include, right? Is some sort of an elevator pulley system. How do people get around this massive tree? Obviously, elves are typically considered to be nimble and agile and able to kind of get around. And not everybody is going to be, Legolas levels of, agility and being able to climb and stuff. You're going to have children and you're going to have elderly. People are going to be disabled, I assume, in some way, physically or whatever. So they're going to have some way to move people around. Elevator, let's see, elevator. Here's where water could make sense again, potentially, if they have some sort of water system that allows them. I'm kind of thinking like canals, but maybe more of like if you have a tube filled with water and you put something in, like if you put like a little canister, so like a water elevator, I guess, right? So a conventional elevator is a tube with a, capsule that then uses pulleys to move you up and down, right? Well, you could have kind of like a canal type thing lift, or you basically have a tube that's filled with water and you have your capsule, right? You have an airtight capsule, which would be your elevator pod. Essentially, you hop into the pod, and then the pod wants to float. It wants to go up. So the pods at the bottom, they basically always go up, and then they stop at whatever stops they need to stop at. And then once they get to all the way to the top, couple options: they could flood the capsule and let it sink all the way back to the bottom. So this would be a one way. You'd only be able to go up in this scenario. Or maybe they have some sort of a mechanism where they put like a heavy weight on top of it that then, counterbalances all of the air. So then they can swing them back all the way to the bottom. And then then they take that weight off. They still have to get the weights back up though. So the other way you could do it is if you had you'd have two different chutes essentially. So let's say you've got one tube that's filled with water. That's your upward momentum. Your capsules are going to try to float. So they're going to move up. You're going to have some sort of a mechanism to stop them at each point, let people off or on, and then remove that locking mechanism and let them continue up to the very top. Once they get to the top, then they get slid over to different chute essentially, where they probably use then again some type of a pulley mechanism to lower them back down slowly to the bottom. But then again, if you're going to use pulleys at all, then like why even use the water? Just use the pulleys and let them go up and down, instead of just the one. But I just feel like elves and nature wise, as far as technology goes, dwarves and stuff, it would make sense if they've got some sort of like water powered elevators and pulley systems and whatever. But elves, it would just feel like they would have a more natural approach, right? Not that they don't use technology, but they try to be as close to nature as possible. So I feel like they wouldn't necessarily go to the mechanical first, pulleys and levers being a little bit more mechanical than, using water pressure, for example, to move around. I don't know. That's an interesting thought, though, as to what kind of things you would have if they did go the mechanical route of having, just straight up elven elevators. You also potentially have the concept of like gondolas, some sort of, like chairlift, skylift thing where you have these carts that are being pulled across large distances, via a pulley system, which would be very interesting and kind of cool. Personally, if I could be in a giant tree like this, would it be super cool to like take the gondola from one section across this big open area where you're got this cool view, you're looking at the trees and you're getting, loaded up to another area that's lower or higher. So yeah, some sort of a chairlift gondola type system could make sense as well. If you wanted to get a little bit more mechanical with it. Elevators, potential water pressure, boats and stuff wouldn't make quite as much sense. If there are some sort of tamed flying creature, you could have, like kind of like an Avatar, the Avatar series where there's like the dragon reptile flying things that they can ride on, so they can use those to get around. Again, that doesn't necessarily help if you have like children or like elderly people or disabled people. It's going to be kind of hard for them probably to ride beasts to get around. So there's some ideas there. Different sections. I wanted to go back to the different sections of what, what would the makeup of the tree be? So you've got your root system and kind of the ground layer, which is going to be very different from your top like canopy layer and your trunk layer. So I almost feel like you've got kind of three major spots. So ground area is going to be that's going to be how you access the tree, right? So hunters and foragers are going to be coming in and out of there. If you're going to be doing some sort of like burial rituals and the like to, feed the roots of the tree, that's going to happen kind of in this root system area. It's also going to be where largely you're going to want to have defenses for, that's the main spot that people are going to be attacking if they're attacking your city, right? So you're going to need to have some sort of walls or defenses, likely natural in a way. I almost could see this as being like those swamp trees. I think they're called mangroves, where the roots are like exposed. So you have like a lot of like gnarled, curly root system, and almost to some degree, the defense of this place would be that it's almost like a winding maze and tunnels to get, into certain areas of the tree, right? And the root system almost acts as a defensive barrier just because people get lost in there. It's hard to move through it. Like if you're trying to move forces, like military forces through it, it'd be like one at a time. It'd be hard to like climb through. And you've got elves who know their way through like these tunnels and these curves and are just nimble enough to get through and to kind of eliminate enemy soldiers before it's a problem. Your main concern then is going to be like, well, if we can't get through it, we'll just burn it down, right? Like that's the easy solution to something like this. So you would need some sort of a defense or just scouts, rangers, preemptive strike forces that would be eliminating exterior threats, right? If anybody tries to get in, the guards are just going to take them out and you're just going to, bottleneck them and make it impossible for them to get in. But then you're going to have, like strike forces that would go out to do defenses probably to just kind of keep the areas safe so that people aren't starting your tree on fire. And maybe something about the roots makes them, fireproof or mostly fireproof, right? Like there's got to be a lot of water moving through these roots. So maybe as soon as you burn the outside or you put a hole in it, it starts leaking water. So then like the fires just kind of don't really work, right? Like if you try to just soak wood in water and you try to burn it, it doesn't burn very well. Even it's still flammable, but it just doesn't burn well. It takes a lot to get wet wood to burn. So, there could be some kind of natural immunities to that as well. Now, if you're in a drought, you've got other problems because now the water situation is not going to be there anymore to help protect it from fires. Then moving up the trunk. So I guess the base layer is a lot of kind of functional, getting in, getting out, defenses, burials, and that sort of thing. So probably not a lot of like living areas there. I guess I would say probably poorer areas would live there because it's not really meant for living. It's not a great living space if there are any. But that's where like potentially you have not necessarily churches, but like your morgues or whatever, your like undertakers and stuff, like they probably like live near the root systems and maybe people see them as like creepy and weird, right? These are like the root dwellers, like the hunters and the foragers, they come and go and they just pass through these areas. But like the undertakers, they live here, they're just a little weird and twisted, like the roots. And the next kind of chunk, and I'm sure you could split this into several chunks, would be the trunk of the tree. And if you wanted to do some sort of a class system, you probably would do the higher up the trunk you are, the more, like wealthy or more well off you are, the areas are, right? Kind of makes me think of the like 1313 from Star Wars and like Coruscant. Like the lower levels of Coruscant are not wealthy, right? Like if you're on the surface, you're doing real well. If you can see the skyline, you're doing real well. If you're, but there are hundreds of layers of city. And if you're underneath, you're not probably doing so great. And so you could have various sections. But for the most part, I feel like the trunk would be like your everyday people for the most part. You're going to have living spaces. You're going to have markets. You might have different bathhouses, all of these various things in places. And as you move up, the wealth might get a little bit better. In the center of the tree, I would think the center would maybe be slightly more like utility, or, there's going to be more water and stuff on inside potentially. I don't know if that would make a ton of difference. There's also thinking, so top to bottom, or bottom to top, is, wealth goes up as you go up, but wealth also probably increases as you get to the outside edges of like the trunk or the tree, because that's where you're going to have like a nicer view. So like the interior kind of might be poorer. And then as you get to the exterior places on the tree, you might have more wealth, you might have nicer quality stuff because that's where the views are. And then I guess the top makes me think of like, to some degree, like nobility, government, management, right? Like they're all at the top of the tree and they don't come down and talk to anybody. And maybe you've got a handful of, you've got living spaces, like high-end living spaces and stuff. government sections and rooms. So you've got different sections of the canopy, essentially maybe dedicated to government, dedicated to ruling and laws, stuff like that. And they maybe don't typically venture down. So you would probably have some higher end like marketplaces and stuff like that that specifically caters to those like officials and the nobles and stuff. But for the most part, normal people wouldn't typically be allowed up there very much, and adventurers probably wouldn't get up there unless there's some, high-end political stuff going on. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts for, this kind of grand elven tree scenario. Please leave comments and let me know how you would use this, anything, any takeaways or any additions you would add to this. And then if anybody's interested in coming on and being a guest and just, picking something and doing a little bit of world building sometime, just to have some back and forth discussions, please hit me up on Twitter or Discord and let's get something scheduled because it's a lot of fun.